How would you like a free case of craft beer? Well, as a listener to our show, we'd like to thank you for listening, and with the help of our friends at beer52.com, we can do just that. Just go to beer52.com/vision. That's beer, the number 52.com/vision to claim a free case. Beer 52 is the world's most popular monthly craft beer discovery club. They search out incredible and exclusive small batch craft beers from the world's greatest breweries and bring them back for their members. There is a whole world of craft beer out there. You don't have to drink the same thing over and over again. You don't have to order beer not knowing what you like. Just get on board with discovering great craft beer with beer52.com. Every month focuses on a new country or theme, and if you sign up now, you'll get the chance to try a case of the best of British craft beers as part of their Summer Bangers selection, all for free. Featuring the country's best craft brewers such as Northern Monk, Ilkley, Red Willow, and Thornbridge, all very delicious. You'll be able to read all about the beers and learn more about how they are made in a 100-page ferment magazine included in the box. As a listener to our show, you can try your first case for free. Just pay £2.95 postage. That's it. 8 incredible craft beers delivered to you, ferment magazine, and a snack with free next-day shipping. It's a no-brainer. There's no minimum commitment. You can just take the free case, try the beers, see what you think. If it's not for you, you can pause, cancel anytime. Beer 52 has a 5-star rating on Trustpilot, so it's easy to see that their members love the service. Do it now. Try some craft beer. Just visit beer52.com. That's www.beer52.com/vision and claim your free case today. Try it. Beer52.com. It is the way to learn more about great beers around the world. Offer valid in the UK only.
Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer!
Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it!
And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
Same old flaws on display as Arsenal capitulate at home again. Guys, this is last year's script. Can you give me the new one? Yes, this year, new season script. Thank you. Gosh, amateur hour. Valiant Arsenal battle their way to a loss as new era dawns, but bright shoots of recovery are on the way. This is the ArsenalVision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right, we're not going to take that dim, old, negative view of this game. We are going to see the positives in what was admittedly a disappointing opening day loss, but an opening day loss in which there is plenty to dig into, plenty to discuss. Clive will be along to discuss it with me later. But first, you can find Paul on Twitter at PositiveMyPants. Hello, Paul.
Woohoo.
Tim is on Twitter at Stilberto. Tim, welcome back.
My pleasure.
Quick housekeeping before we dive into this. We are giving away an Arsenal shirt in case you missed our preseason preview, in which case, shame on you. Actually, it wasn't a preseason preview. It was just season preview. So if you go to our website, ArsenalVisionPodcast.com, you'll find shirt giveaway. All you have to do is answer a question from the season preview podcast. I even tell you the minute to find it, so real easy to find. We're going to give away a home, away, third kit, your choice, your player, shipped to you for free, and we're going to announce that winner on the post-Chelsea podcast. And that's going to be a big podcast because after winning 5-0 at Stamford Bridge, we're going to have a lot to get stuck into. So there's that. We would love it if you would support us on Patreon. We are posting special recordings there all week. Live shows that we do are being posted for patrons up there. We're going to have special contributors. Already have one lined up for this week. And then we'll be doing things like deep dives on players, content that we love, that we're finding across the Twitters and the internet. So there'll be a lot of good stuff on Patreon. For those of you who signed up, thank you so much. And if you love the pod and you would support us there, we would appreciate it. If you don't, no problem. We're still going to put this podcast out as often as ever and totally free. So thank you so much for that. In any event, let's get started. It was a 2-0 loss at home to start the Unai Emery era. And Tim, as we often like to do when we have you on the podcast, is just get a sense of what it was like at the Emirates and what the experience on match day was like, because this is brand new. I mean, he has been in charge for preseason games, but this is very different. So I guess for you personally, what was it like seeing a new man on the touchline? And just in terms of the atmosphere at the Emirates generally, did you see a palpable difference from maybe other season openers of the past?
Certainly before the game, yeah. Before the game was really, really interesting, actually. I was playing a bit of football next to the stadium beforehand, and then I kind of came out around about 2:00, 2:30, and there were a lot of people around. There were probably more people around at about 2:30, an hour and a half before kickoff, than there were in the stadium for most home games last season. There was a real palpable buzz, and I went up Blackstock Road, where I drink before games. All the pubs were completely full. People were singing inside the pubs, and I haven't heard that at home for several years now. Apologies about my neighbours drilling.
I have to say, Tim, though, the new microphone is so good that it just sounds like you're gently farting as opposed to drilling. So it's doing the job.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll be able to squeeze that in as well.
A little of both. Okay.
But yeah, so it was the hills were alive with the sound of music, as it were, and people seemed really, really perky, and everything was full. And even though the sun wasn't out, people were spilling out outside in the pubs, and it was absolutely palpable. And just trying to spot new things. So things like Darren Burgess leading the warm up, for example, which is new. He didn't used to do that. It used to be Shad Forsyth, but Darren Burgess was out there, and I sit directly opposite the dugout, so I get a good view of both dugouts actually. And just having Unai Emery patrolling the touchline, and obviously it's quite early in his vision, as it were, and he wants his team to press and to move, and just to see him out there kind of dishing out instructions and at times orchestrating what was happening, and telling the fullbacks to stay up when we were trying to play out from the back, because both of them really wanted to drift backwards and help the centre halves, and just spotting all these new things, which I think for the first couple of games will be a bit of a novelty, but obviously generally that will wear off. And to be honest, it did wear off. Once Man City went 1-0 up, it was a bit same old, and I think people maybe talked themselves into believing that we were going to beat Man City, which was just stupid and setting yourself up for disappointment. And I found it a bit embarrassing, actually, how quickly people got on the team's backs when they were trying to play out. And this is obviously going to take some time. And, literally hearing people cheer a long ball was really, I was just thinking, wow, this is the sort of thing people would exaggerate about in some kind of joke about English football fans. I just thought this is a bit embarrassing. This is like 20 minutes in, and people have already kind of not given up. Obviously, they were frustrated in the moment, but yeah, I found that a bit disappointing. Actually, I really thought that people might commit at least for a couple of games to that.
Yeah, it's funny, Tim, because in the season preview pod, I said the pet peeve that I think people will develop about Emery that they'll start getting on his back about is playing out from the back and silly mistakes, trying to play out from the back, coming back to bite us. I didn't think that would be in the first 20 minutes of the first game of the season, but it was incredible how quickly people wanted to give up on this new strategy in the first game, when it's pretty clear that it's the kind of strategy that the best teams are employing, and one that we would be well served developing. And there's no greater test in trying to develop it than against the best pressing team, and maybe the best team in Europe, in Manchester City. And we'll get to where they rank as competition and how we should take it, take the result in the context of that. But we'll get to that a little later. And the good news, Tim, it sounds like your neighbors are almost to the vault. So they might be done.
No, it's just I muted the mic.
Oh, okay. So they're still on their way to the vault. Got it. They're definitely not hanging a picture doing that much drilling. So look, Paul, the big news, and there's no getting around it, is the lineup he puts out. And if Emery was tempted to be conservative on his first day in a big game in front of the home fans, he certainly didn't show it. He didn't play the £20 million goalkeeper signing. He did play Guendouzi. No room for Torreira today, probably just because he felt he wasn't integrated yet. And Aubameyang looked like he was going to play up front, but then there was this sort of bizarre formation, which was clearly a 4-3-3. The front three was Mkhitaryan, Aubameyang, and Ramsey, but Ramsey really playing more of the central role there. And then Ozil, Guendouzi, and Xhaka in the middle. How surprised were you with the lineup, and in particular, the way he was deploying that personnel?
More surprised with the formation, to be honest. And as we spent so much time, especially early on, out of possession, it was basically a 4-4-2 with Ozil covering Bellerin and having to work pretty hard at it. And I would say actually working pretty hard at it. He actually won a a header on the edge of our box halfway through the first half. I'm like, wow, normally he'll duck out of those and stick his ass under the guy and hope to win it that way. But no, he went up for a header and won it.
And by the way, I'm going to give you your due so you don't have to, because you deserve it. You did call that Guendouzi would start, and indeed he did.
I did. In fact, I pretty much got the formation right. I didn't pick a goalie. I would have guessed Czech, though I kind of thought with the way we're going to try and play out, I was kind of a bit 50-50 on that. So I didn't actually pick between the two goalies. I thought El Neni would start ahead of Ramsey because Ramsey wasn't fit. But apart from that, I could see why he was going to pick who he picked. I didn't see Ramsey at the kind of second striker spot. And in many ways, he was the first striker. Well, what was also interesting was how much, even in the first half, Aubameyang defaulted to that left wing spot. And of course, we'll talk about the Lacazette switch. But it's interesting how often he comes in from that side regardless. So it was a very interesting lineup. What I take heart from is not so much that it worked great, because he basically switched away from that for the second half. It's that he's willing to try different things against City, and he'll maybe won't need to do quite so much creative restructuring against other teams, but all possibilities are open. All players will be asked to do different things. Ozil and Ramsey, probably the two most notable aspects of it in the first half, and players will get yanked. Now, maybe Ramsey had a niggle or fitness, but I'm all for seeing players who have to play 90 minutes being yanked off after 50, 60 minutes, be it Ramsey, Ozil, whoever, because that's what makes sense in a game. So formations were interesting in the start. It was interesting how they were evolved. The subs were interesting.
Okay, so yeah. Got it. I felt that we were starting to go into the point of that contribution where it was going to be, here's everything that happened in the game all at once.
But I think it's all part of a mindset that says everything in terms of lineup and selections and subs is on the table.
Yeah, no, and that is a really important point, is that it's all too easy to compare and contrast everything against how Arsene would have done it, and sometimes see change and difference where there is none. An example of that, and Tim referenced it. Yes, Unai Emery is much more animated on the touchline than Arsene has been over the past many years. The extent to which that makes any difference at all is open for debate. I mean, you could say it does make a difference. He's not just animated, he's orchestrating, he's giving instruction, and certainly there may be some of that, but some of it is just, look at how different this is. But there's a
new Godwin's law, which is that the longer a conversation in Arsenal goes on, the greater the inevitability of a Wenger comparison. It's the new Hitler comparisons, and they're not.
So you're saying that Arsene Wenger was Hitler at Arsenal? You know what? I'm going to bail you out and move on. Okay, fair enough. Tim, aside from the Holocaust that was wrought upon us for the past 20 years, apparently, we were trying something new in this game. That was clear. I don't know that everybody totally understands what we were trying. So I'd love to get your take. I don't think Emery's first plan worked, but I'd love to get your take on what you think the plan was. From your viewpoint, what did you feel he was trying to accomplish with the way he was setting us up?
So what interested me, actually, and I'm not sure whether I paid enough attention in pre-season or whether this was something quite new, was how high up Ramsey was playing. That was Dele Alli, second striker. He had almost nothing to do with the midfield. I don't know, a lot of people think that he never has anything to do with the midfield, but I happen to think they're wrong.
Well, to back you up with that, he completed just 7 passes in his 50-some-odd minutes on the pitch.
Yeah, because actually what it looks like a lot of his role is going to be under Emery is off the ball. He is the trigger. He is the one who starts that press every single time. I think we saw that in pre-season, but what will be really interesting will be if he persists with playing Ramsey quite that high, almost, more striker than midfielder, or whether that was just a plan for City. Unfortunately, I think if this is what Emery wants to do in terms of the high press, that was definitely far more notable. It was far more coordinated. There were triggers. Obviously, we haven't got it right yet. It's going to take a little while, but I think that was reasonably obvious that was one of the things he's going to try to do. Unfortunately for us, if there is one team in the world that can absolutely cope with that, it's Man City. It does not bother them in the slightest. And it was a good frame of comparison for us, actually, how they dealt with our press compared to how we dealt with theirs. And you kind of look at it and think, yeah, that's a lot of expensive players. That's, an absolutely sensational coach and a couple of years together. And obviously we're not in any of those territories just yet. And obviously the playing out from the back thing. What I found interesting about that was because I've been thinking if and when Torreira and Xhaka play together, who's going to be the one that drops back between the centre halves to distribute play? And it looks like it's going to be Torreira, because Guendouzi was doing that and Xhaka was a little bit further up the pitch. And actually, and maybe again, I'm citing the new Godwin's law here, that under Wenger, we used to do that. He used to try and do that 2 number 6s thing where players rotated who went back and took the ball off the centre halves, and he might do that. But I think this might be a problem for Xhaka if he's not the guy that goes and
I totally agree. Yep, I totally
receives
agree.
the ball between the centre halves, because what kept happening was it was Guendouzi doing it. So that to me means that that's going to be Torreira's job, which means when Xhaka does receive it, he's under a little bit more pressure. He's facing his own goal, and it's not a comfortable place for him to receive the ball. And I do wonder what that might mean for him long term. Maybe it depends who we're playing against. Maybe when we play against most teams at home who do tend to sit off of us, Xhaka will be much more comfortable, will have much more time. But
I did think
he looked
Tim,
uncomfortable.
Just wondering what you thought. I did think it evolved a bit during the game. To me, it felt like to begin with, Xhaka was the guy designated to receive, and Guendouzi wasn't having a great game and hadn't really settled. And more as the game went on, it was more Guendouzi and then Torreira who settled into that area, which kind of took the burden off Xhaka a little bit, whether by design or by accident. So it seemed like it evolved a bit by accident or design, or who was actually just more comfortable doing it and who they sought out. But there was also the long conversation between Emery and Guendouzi. So I wonder... Maybe it was just my imagination, but it seemed like Xhaka was the guy putting himself on the spot to pick up the ball, and we could see those slow feet in action early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it kind of changed a bit. So Guendouzi certainly finished the game as more of an 8 than a 4, if that makes sense. And in terms of how we were trying to play going forward, I mean, it's so difficult to lay a glove on City. The only very slight kind of conniptions that we caused were the long ball over the top, because City play quite a high line, and unfortunately Xhaka's radar just wasn't quite on. He just overhit a couple of those, which I think another couple of games when he gets his eye in, he might, because Xhaka did a few things as well that he doesn't usually do. We know he has his flaws, but he doesn't usually give the ball away. He can be pressured off of it and he can turn it over. He doesn't usually give it away though, and he gave it away a few times. And I think him and Ozil, probably no coincidence that both of them were at the World Cup, and they both, Ozil's touch was off, and whatever you say about Ozil, his touch is never off. That's never the problem with Mesut Ozil, and it was yesterday. So I think there was a little bit of rust there, and the reason I think he started Guendouzi, as much as having a good pre-season, I think that Emery realised that for all that the squad's been fairly settled during pre-season, because we didn't have a lot of players at the World Cup, the one area where we did was midfield. And I think he maybe took the decision, I've got El Neni who was at the World Cup, I've got Xhaka and I've got Torreira, and I can only play one of them. And he went for Xhaka, maybe for the same reason he went for Cech in goal, for a bit of familiarity, not blooding the new boys too quickly. But yeah, I think that's my reading of that decision, that he thought, I can't play 2 undercooked central midfielders, I can only play one, and he went for Xhaka.
Yeah, and one thing that I think we have to say is, Tim, I know you're a big believer that you just throw out preseason, right? I mean, that it's a fitness exercise for players, but we kind of forget you don't necessarily throw out preseason if you're a new coach and it's your first look at your players. And
No.
I do think that the first team against City reflected, at least to some extent, how he felt these players performed in preseason, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
the
go ahead,
players
Tim.
and the coach shouldn't throw out preseason, but the fans should.
Right, right, and certainly the results. I think the results
Yeah,
of preseason you can throw out. But I mean, Guendouzi had a very good preseason. He played a lot, and he started this game. Cech arguably was the more impressive keeper, and he started this game. I think, Torreira didn't really look ready in his last preseason start. He didn't play a lot of that game, and that may have been a mistake not starting him, but that seemed to inform the decision not to start him in this game. So, I do think...
Conversely, Elliot, these are the players who had the chance to play the most within his system, including Cech. I mean, he had a lot more minutes than Leno.
Yeah.
And nobody played more than Guendouzi in the midfield. Guendouzi and El Neni were the guys who played the most.
I mean, you could argue that Lacazette had a great preseason and probably would have considered himself unlucky not to start. And had the opposition been different, I think he would have started. And he showed his quality when he came on. The interesting thing to me, I asked you, Tim, what you thought he was trying to achieve with the way he set us up. I think defensively, what looked pretty clear to me was four, flat back four, and then two narrow banks of three in the center of the pitch. And the fullbacks were playing very close to the center backs. And I think what we were doing was trying to completely close down central spaces and not get played through in the middle of the pitch. And it worked to an extent, but we got killed in wide positions. Now, maybe Emery looked at it and said, look, they're going to kill you somewhere. I'm okay letting them kill us in wide positions because, to be fair, they're probably not going to win a lot of headers in the box. Crosses are hard chances to score from. Headed chances off crosses are low XG chances. So maybe he felt we'll give up those wide spaces because we have a height advantage in the box, and those are low XG chances to create. The problem is when we gave up the wide spaces, I thought we were far too timid in our duels and in our defending on the wings, and we let those wide players carry the ball right into our box. We had a lot of slips, a lot of sloppy defending, a lot of missed challenges, and players just started dribbling their way into the box. There was the period where Mustafi hung a couple of legs on the right channel. Maitland-Niles slipped and got bypassed on the left side. So I think the tactic defensively was actually probably pretty sound theoretically, but I think the way we executed on it from those wide positions was too timid and not aggressive enough once they got into those spaces. Paul, is that sort of what you saw us doing defensively?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the other aspects for the wings is how aggressively Mkhitaryan and Ozil were able to help out there. To cover that spaces, and neither of them is ideally suited to it. But I think he absolutely made the decision to sacrifice the wings and to take his lumps, because that at least allowed him in the first game against City not to have our defence torn to shreds with gaps through the middle or have them run through our midfield. So it's kind of a bit Zulu Dawn with 10,000 Zulus coming over the top. I mean, you basically... You get everybody together in the center and you fight it out together and you try and hit them on the counter. And you know that ultimately City are going to enjoy that. But you come away from it at least with having had a cohesive defense and midfield where you hung together and where you're guaranteed kind of 95% of it's going to work okay and you're going to feel okay about that piece. So I think mentally playing a gambit that stretches you out and covers the wings is just going to leave the kinds of holes that when you lose 3-0 at the end of that, you're going to feel like shit. They're just going to have run through you. And if you think about the two goals, I mean, the first one in particular is a moment of brilliance, but it definitely comes from that space on the wing. But we kind of should have stopped him as he came through the middle. So they shouldn't have got that goal. It should have been okay. The Bernardo Silva one was definitely more a case where they had 5-on-4. They had us stretched. We were in trouble on a counter. But in a way, it wasn't because we were defending against them and we gave them the wings. So he might, on a luckier day, they would have scored other goals. But on a luckier day, it wouldn't have been being hurt by those two goals that got us done in.
Yeah, and interestingly, I mean, you can point to the fullbacks who I don't think had a good day. All three of the fullbacks that played, although Lichtsteiner made a big difference, but
I thought Lichtsteiner was good.
I thought he was good, but
in a way he did not. He applied the approach. He didn't sit back. He came out and met them before they got the ball. He's like,
yes.
Fuck this. I'm a 34-year-old wrong-footed fullback. I'm going old school. I'm taking this guy out before he's even got the ball.
No, I don't disagree with that. Look, well, it begs the question. That's the wrong use of begs the question, but just hang with me there. Maitland-Niles is a guy that we anticipated potentially having a lot of time to play at left back. He's now injured. We'll have to see how long he's out. But during the period he was on the pitch, he looked nervous and unsure of himself, and it's kind of a reminder that he isn't naturally a left back. I mean, did his, albeit brief, performance at that position, Paul, dim your expectations of him as our left back solution for this season?
It did a bit, and you can't judge people on one game. We've seen him before, and he's done better. And this was a proctology exam between Walker and Mahrez. I mean, talk about two fucking sides of a
with only Mkhitaryan for help. Yeah, that's not great.
With the policy that says stay close to us, but also cover the wing. But on the other hand, the upside was Lichtsteiner looked okay as a left back. In fact, he looked very effective, not just defensively. I mean, on the attack side, he wasn't getting in behind them, and he put in a cross or two, nothing too spectacular. But the number of touches and his involvement, he was probably one of our highest passers for the phase of the game he was in. I thought he looked very good, and we looked much more solid on that wing. So mixed bag there, obviously. Sad for Maitland-Niles. Hopefully he's back quick. Mentally, I don't know that he's ever really committed to the idea of truly being a defender. I don't think he enjoys it. I don't think he ever has, really.
Yeah, the problem we saw with Lichtsteiner, and I do think he played really well, although I think he may have some culpability in their second goal. But he's a right back, not a left back, and he had one beautiful little pullback into the box for Ozil, who miscontrolled it badly on a day that just went wrong for him in general. But with his other deliveries, we saw that he was on his weaker foot, and that's obviously a problem if we're going to try to use him as a left back going forward. Tim, the first goal is a combination of errors, and it's Hector Bellerin's poor defensive header, actually, that puts us in it to begin with. And then he's not tracking Sterling across the box. He kind of hands him off to Guendouzi. Guendouzi maybe has the wrong body position, dives in a little early. And then it is a 0.1 XG, a 10% shot from there that goes in. I mean, people are saying it's terrible defending, but to be fair, it goes through three bodies. Czech is shielded. He probably saves it if he has a clearer look at it. But Guendouzi does dive in a little. Do you think that the criticism on that goal, especially directed at Guendouzi, is a little harsh, or would you expect us to do better in that situation?
I would kind of expect us to do better in that situation. I think we allowed Sterling to cut inside too easily, where really you want to be showing him down the line at that point. And generally, Bellerin actually did that quite well, but it was far too easy for him to get inside. And then, I mean, it depends on what the plan is from that point. Have they been told to hand people off into zones, or have they been told to? Because, we've gone to man marking from corners, for instance. Is that the same in open play, or do we hand people off? I think usually you'd expect someone to be kind of handed off to someone who's actually playing in that position. And for Guendouzi, this is a very, very steep learning curve. And I mean, I think really he has quite a bit of culpability in the goal. At the time, I wondered if Czech should have saved it, but when I saw the replay, because I wasn't really an advantageous angle for it because I was watching it side on, but when I saw the replay kind of from behind the shot, there's a lot in his way. And it's a minor miracle that it actually gets through all of those bodies. And to Paul's point, if we were, in that moment, you can kind of see that the plan was to block up the centre of the pitch because there's a lot of bodies in the centre. But the problem was there weren't a lot of bodies out wide, and it just allowed Sterling a little bit too much freedom to come in. And I felt with Maitland-Niles, yeah, he had a tough time, but he was given absolutely zero protection from Mkhitaryan, who I was incredibly disappointed in. He offered very, very little protection, even for that couple of minutes where Maitland-Niles was clearly, barely able to walk. Mkhitaryan did not drop back. He didn't look to help. I thought he was incredibly disappointing, not least because I don't think he's a lazy player by any stretch of the imagination, but he really didn't offer any protection there at all. Ozil did a better job of that on the other side, and if Mesut Ozil is your other winger and he's the one that's doing more work than you, then I think you've got to look at that quite seriously. But it was City probed and they found a chink in our armour. Like we said, we were looking to concede the wide areas, but that just meant that Bellerin was a bit isolated when Sterling came in, and then Guendouzi probably doesn't do quite enough. But at the same time, I don't think either of those are enormous mistakes. I think most teams in the world don't punish you there, but Man City do. That's like a slight 5% deficiency there, and City punish that. Most other teams don't. So maybe I'm slightly more relaxed about it, and I think Guendouzi has massive mitigation in terms of he's gone from playing, League Two in France to playing what I think is the best football team in the world at the moment. So that's quite an education. So, and I'm not sure that he'll start again. I think we'll see Torreira come into the team, and we'll probably see Guendouzi on the bench. So,
well, we can come to that because I actually disagree. I think it'll be Xhaka who loses his place, and I think that's a debate we can have. The thing I will say is, if we're going to be critical of Guendouzi there, and I think it's fair to be, and I think Torreira is much more suited stylistically to tracking a player across the top of the box and shutting down chances. We saw that for Uruguay, but Bellerin's defensive header there is really, really poor under no pressure. And we saw a lot of that on the day, just poor execution of simple skills that we know these players can do better. You know what I mean? There was a lot of that. There was a lot of that in the attacking half from Ozil. There was a lot of that in the defensive half. There's Cech nearly passing it into his net. They looked a little nervous and tentative, and these players are still learning this new way of playing. I get that. But there were things that should be basic rudimentary skills for them that they got wrong on the day, and I don't think they would get it wrong on another day.
Yeah, maybe not. But also, I think the stage of the season we're at as well, players are a little bit undercooked. I mean, towards the end, Ederson passed the ball to Ozil, and that is completely unlike him. But he was,
and then look what Ozil did with it, which is completely unlike him. Yeah,
exactly. That's two players who are absolutely world class in their positions, and again, they have flaws, but their flaws are absolutely not focused on touch and passing. But in that moment, you had Ederson completely making a balls up of the pass, and then Ozil making a complete balls up of the touch. If that's September or October, Ederson probably doesn't do that in the first place, and if he does, then Ozil brings that under control. So I think you can see a little bit that some players were undercooked. And one of the conversations my friends and I had were like, I watched the Spurs game on Saturday, and they looked massively undercooked. They looked completely unprepared physically. But what they did was they got their noses in front, and then they just held on for the last half an hour. And one of the things we were talking about was let's try and stay in this until maybe the 70th minute, because City played all their England players. They played a lot of guys who'd been at the World Cup this summer. And I thought it was definitely a tall order, and I didn't think that we were going to do it. But we kind of thought, if it's only one goal on 70 minutes, we might have a bit of a chance here. But once they got the second goal, that was never on, basically. So I think maybe there's a bit of the fullness of time will tell us, but maybe there's a bit of mitigation because it's just the first game of the season. Yeah,
and I do think while we were much, much better after the substitutions, and we'll come to that briefly, but I also think there was visibly a lowering of the press intensity by City towards the last 30 minutes of the game. And there was a part of me that was worried they were playing possum, letting us come at them a little more so they could hit us on the counter. It may have just been that Pep recognized he had a 2-goal lead and his players, don't have it to go press us aggressively for 90 minutes at this stage of the season. I don't know. The game ended on XG, Manchester City 1.66, Arsenal 0.37. So they comfortably had us, but overwhelmingly that happened in the first hour, and the last 30 minutes was, I think Arsenal had the better of the play. Paul, I do want to come to the Guendouzi or Guendouzi part of the show, depending on how you'd like me to pronounce it. By the way, if you sign up for our Patreon, you can recommend ways you'd like me to pronounce names on the podcast. He had he was involved in two high-profile screw-ups. The Sterling goal, where I don't think it's a screw-up, but he definitely does not get his challenge and his tracking right there. And then there's the long kick out from the back, where the ball just goes under his foot and he lets Aguero in, and Aguero should be sliding in. Is it De Bruyne at that point? Whoever it is, for an easy goal, but it's saved well by Cech. And by the way, as much as Cech deserves criticism for his play with his feet on the day, I think he deserves credit for keeping this scoreline relatively flattering to some extent, because he did make good saves. Yeah,
and also Aguero doesn't miss that chance in September or October either. Further to my previous point. No,
and that's why, thankfully, we're not playing him September and October, and it's just a 2-0 defeat. But Paul, so in terms of Guendouzi, there are a lot of people saying, oh, well, for a young player, he did okay, or he had some mistakes, but it's not a bad debut for a young player. And what I would say is, show me the senior player who did better than him. If you had to rank from best to worst, our best players and our worst players, I'm not saying Guendouzi had a eye-catching, mind-blowing, extraordinary game. What I'm saying is he stepped up. He took a lot of responsibility. If you look at Scott's by the numbers column for Arsblog, which he is writing now, and congrats to Scott on landing that prestigious gig, Guendouzi led us in passing. Okay, he had, let me have it, bring it up, I have it right here. So for the game, Guendouzi was completed 38 passes, 7 of 11 in the final third, 1 of 1 into the box, 1 dribble, 1 time dispossessed, 4 of 6 on tackles, second on Arsenal, 4 interceptions, second on Arsenal. And he was dispossessed 7 times, or lost possession, 6 bad touches and 1 time dispossessed. So, that part's not ideal, although Ozil was our most dispossessed player. But I guess what I would say to you, Paul, is forget grading on a curve for a minute. As compared to the other players who will not be scrutinized in the same way, do you think Guendouzi was one of our better performers on the day?
Absolutely. I think so. I think it was a game of two halves, starting around 38 minutes when Lichtsteiner came on. Somehow we developed some actual spine across the full back four at that point and stemmed the bleeding. Maybe it was just the nature of the game state, the fact that we were now chasing a goal. Maybe it was the fact that maybe City dropped off their intensity a little bit. But from about 38 minutes on, I think you can see basically everybody having a better game, and in particular Guendouzi would love to throw away that first 30 or so minutes. I thought he was quite timid. He looked like a 19-year-old player from the French second division who suddenly wasn't sure he was supposed to be on this pitch with Manchester City. And after about 30-something minutes, he got into it and started playing with that confidence we saw in pre-season. So I think that last 60 minutes or so, he kind of came to the fore, and he really looked for the ball from that point on. I think it became clearer he was the natural outlet to it. The fact that he got dispossessed a bunch of times against City because he's in the middle of the park, taking on that responsibility, not too surprising. I definitely think he's in our top 3 players from that game, if you ignore his clangers. And the good thing about him is he seems to be able to ignore his clangers. He doesn't get rattled by it. I think that's the good news. The one where Aguero, the ball goes over the top to Aguero, is just him playing that with the wrong foot, because he's 19 and probably has never really been in this kind of situation before, where you're the only. I mean, he was the total defense at that point. I mean, it was him versus Aguero, and the next thing, the ball's hopping over his head, and Aguero's one-on-one with Cech. That's not how it's supposed to be. That Guendouzi is your back line against the counter. So it's all new to him. I thought he did really well. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic about that. I agree with Tim that he's not going to be a starter for a long time, even though I called him for this game. Torreira will come in. I think Xhaka good chance Xhaka's playing beside him and will look a lot better because it'll buy him some time. I know he's not the most natural, if you want to call it, number 8 or number 6, operating alongside the deepest player, but it'll give him that extra yard he needs even when we're being pressed, because he's not the guy being most pressed, and he'll have his head up pointing in the right direction and he can spray the ball around. And I think Torreira and him can be a really good partnership. Of course, the question is, where is Ramsey playing? Is he part of a 3, etc.? But if you just consider Xhaka, I think his best look for us, it's not that he never receives the ball from the centre backs or from the keeper, it's that he's the second option. He gets 1 in 3 of the ball, so he's not the guy most pressed. He has that bit of time. I think he'll start to look a lot better. He's just not the man to take the real heat. That's Torreira, and in the future, Guendouzi for me. So yeah, I thought Guendouzi was great and a real ray of optimism. And in a year to 2 years' time, it'll be Guendouzi and Torreira, and this season we'll see a bit more of Guendouzi as the season goes on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just feel like that's reading tea leaves based on how the old manager used to do it. And I don't see any indication that that's the case. Guendouzi played all preseason. He started this game, and Xhaka came off when Torreira came on, and Guendouzi stayed on and looked great during that period, and it was our best period of the match. So, while I'm not saying the 19-year-old kid from Ligue 2 should suddenly be installed as a regular first teamer, I'm saying all evidence suggests that Emery thinks he should. So Tim,
more the fact that he's 19 than the old manager, but I'm sure Tim has a perspective on
sure,
that.
and I take that point, but I mean, we're all familiar with the phrase, if you're good enough, you're old enough, and we saw Cesc Fabregas be the best midfielder in England when he was 19, and I'm not saying Guendouzi is Cesc Fabregas, but Tim, I do want to...
But also proving the rule by being an exception. Anyway,
yes,
Tim.
Cool. Tim, I want to get your thought on this, and I want to make sure we touch on Ozil as well before we have to say goodbye here, and then Clive's going to be on to really set us straight. As far as you're feeling that Xhaka will keep his place, that Guendouzi will go back to the bench, I mean, it may well happen, but what from this performance suggests that that's the right move to you? I mean, is there an argument that what we are starting to see in Granit Xhaka is that the flaws are the slow feet, the vulnerability to pressure, the giveaways in his own half, that those things are not necessarily qualities that Emery is going to particularly endear him to Emery, and that Torreira gives us more of the defensive solidity and Guendouzi gives us more of the mobility and can drive the ball forward. I mean, you've said you think Xhaka will keep his place and Torreira will come in for Guendouzi. I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm just curious to get your take on what you see in Xhaka that makes that the right choice.
So I think, like I said, because the guys that were at the World Cup looked very, very rusty. And again, I'm not kind of denying the flaws you've identified in Xhaka, but there were a couple of other things that he just doesn't usually do wrong in there as well. And like I said, he was hitting those kind of long balls over the top in the first half, and his radar was a little bit off. And so I think quite possibly, and it might not be. I might be again reading too much into the tea leaves. He might just have had a bit of a bad day, but I tend to think it's probably just a little bit of rust there. I think another week in training, get him and Torreira for a week together in training. I think maybe if we were playing in midweek, for example, then maybe Guendouzi would play again. But I think with another kind of 5 days or so at Colney, we can really get Xhaka and Torreira kind of up to top speed. And I think also Guendouzi's performance was very interesting because there was a lot that was, if you remove all of like the context and the mitigation that he's a 19-year-old starting his first ever Premier League game, that there were quite a lot of errors in there. There were quite a lot of quite basic errors, but at the same time he did a lot of good things. So it's kind of hard to appraise his performance because there's this kind of, he made some fairly basic errors, but he also did some really good things. And, he's 19 and he's coming into a new league. So there's a lot of balls up in the air, to coin a phrase at this point. Whereas with Xhaka, I think the Xhaka we saw at the end of last season wasn't the Xhaka we saw yesterday. So, yes, those flaws haven't completely gone away, but I think he was really beginning to iron them out. Maybe that was just a temporary thing. Again, time will tell us. But I just think with another week's training, he'll get the nod. I think Guendouzi, I think Guendouzi has a mistake in him more than Xhaka does, basically.
Yeah, and I think that it's tough, right? I think he probably does have a mistake in him more than Xhaka, and maybe we're just projecting based on age. I think that's fair. It's not that I think Xhaka necessarily has a mistake in him. It's that I think the qualities that limit him are worrying, right? Slowness of foot, vulnerability to pressure. I think, lack of ability to drive the ball forward. And when I think about playing Chelsea and the way Sarri wants to play and what we saw in preseason early in the match against Chelsea where they bypassed our press and then sort of went right through our midfield. I think we need players who can turn and run back towards their goal a little bit, and Xhaka can't do that. I was going to stay with you, Tim, but while the bank vault heist is still underway, I'll go to Paul for a second and then come back to you. I want to wrap up with a discussion of Mesut Ozil, and then when Clive comes on, we'll talk about the stage of the game after the substitutions and how it changed the game and some appraisal of their performances. But Paul, I think it is absolutely fair to note that players looked rusty, that there were mistakes in this game that we just don't see. But this is a poor performance from Ozil, and it is totally fair when someone is supposed to be your best player, one of the best players in the world, and a £350,000 a week player. And I realize that wage is going to hang around his neck like a millstone all season, and he's going to have to almost earn it every game, and it's impossible really to earn that wage every game. But I thought this was a poor performance. The thing that surprised me most in this game is not that we struggled defensively or that we had trouble with their press, but the extent to which we failed to make the most of really positive moves in the attacking third. That there were opportunities, that Ederson gave the ball away a couple of times, and I think chief among those failures was Ozil's lack of accuracy with his final ball and his touch. Were you disappointed in this Ozil performance? And how worrying is it for you that, in another big game, he has sort of produced a 5 out of 10 performance?
So I thought this was a completely different kind of Ozil underperformance. I think that kind of top 5-10% of his game that's supposed to be eye-catching, that quality in the final third, the bigger moments, the killer pass, the killer ball, none of that really came off for him. But the one player who improved significantly on a second watching was Ozil. In other games where he didn't do much and the big stuff didn't happen and he doesn't do the small stuff, this was a game by design where he was required to do significant defensive covering work in the first half, which he did and applied and stuck to and tracked players back and was at our byline blocking Sterling getting crosses in. But also as we started to play better, Ozil is involved in all of that passing and build-up play, moving it from the middle to the final third. I actually thought for the basic stuff, he had a pretty good game in terms of graft, involvement, contribution. So in his two types of bad games, this was the type where he actually, I feel bad for him because he didn't show up and he didn't do much. And that's not really right. His touch was off. He was rusty. He was tired. But the guy grafted his nuts off from what I saw, worked hard and was a big part of what was working for us in getting from the middle to the final third. I think you group this game separately when you go back and look at. I feel bad for him. I think he did everything he could do and his touch was off, basically.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really astute point because I think he also led us in ball recoveries. I mean, this wasn't Ozil sauntering around the pitch too good for the match and letting it bypass him so much as
or his body language going or looking like he was frustrated with everybody else not getting him the ball. This was not that game. He grafted. I felt bad for him at the end of it because it wasn't his fault. His touch was just off. Yeah,
no, that's a fair point. So Tim, I quickly on Ozil, just get your sort of broad assessment of his play, and then I want to just ask you sort of a general question about the performance overall.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what Paul said. I think that's hit the nail on the head, really. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't sloping off. It wasn't coming off for him. And I attribute that largely to a kind of truncated pre-season.
Yeah, I think it's also very hard. The way City put you under such intense pressure for so long, the way you don't have the ball, the way you're on the rack and running around and firefighting. I think it does make it harder in those moments when you get a chance because you're just mentally exhausted. They put you under tremendous physical pressure, but mental pressure as well, just to stay switched on defensively constantly. As far as the game overall, would you say that sort of if you have a biggest disappointment with it, it's actually that we didn't do more with some of the attacking opportunities we created, and that on another day, we might have lucked our way into a result here with a few of the half chances that were there?
I don't think we'd have lucked our way into a result, but we might have got a little bit closer to lucking our way to a result. So, yeah, I think there's that. Aubameyang's touch and his running wasn't quite there as well. And again, a lot of that's just down to the stage of the season we're at, I think. I think basically, Paul and I were talking a little bit just before we came on air. And we were saying, for me, this game was a free hit. Even in 6 months' time or a year's time or 18 months or whatever, when we've got the press down to a T and, we've got the passing out from the back down and Guendouzi is a better player and he's the best midfielder in the world and we've got Leno in goal and he's the best goalkeeper in the world, we still lose 2-0 to this City side who, for me, are... you look at what's happening at Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern at the moment. City are the best team in the world. They should win the Champions League. I think they're... Even when Pep's Barcelona came to the Emirates, Theo Walcott at least gave them a bit of a scare. And we were able to lay a glove on them. We just weren't able to lay a glove on City. And honestly, I don't think it matters what stage we're at. I think that's just how it is. And we probably win the game, I don't know, one time out of 20, 25, something like that. So I think next week will tell us a little bit more about where we are. So I find this performance a little bit difficult to appraise because I just think we lose to City no matter what. And 2-0, it could have been 2-1, it could have been 3-0. Quite frankly, it could have gone further City's way as well. Yeah. And maybe when they're a little less undercooked and they haven't got players at the World Cup and everything, maybe they give us an even better, an even bigger hiding. So I think next week tells us, I'm not saying next week tells us exactly where we are and what our future is and exactly where we are at the, this stage of the era and all of that. I know there's a temptation to build this up, but it's in increments. But next week, I think will tell us a little bit more than this week, which was for me, this was a free hit, and short of getting beaten 5 or 6-0, my expectations were exactly what we got, and I think anyone that wasn't expecting that was setting themselves up for a fall.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it is not nice, I think you would agree, to ever go into any home game as Arsenal Football Club thinking, woe is us, poor little minnows, Arsenal can't compete with City. But I think being realistic and looking at the squad they have over there, they are at the absolute peak of a project, 3 years in, under arguably the greatest manager of the era, with a whole bevy of some of the greatest players in the league and the world. And we are in year one under a new guy trying to play a new way. And all of those factors are totally fair in appraising this. And I will say, much like the way ingredients on a countertop don't always look like the meal you're going to serve, there were some bits and pieces of this game that I looked at and was really encouraged by. A few moments of our pressing, a little bit of our playing out from the back leading to transition opportunities. The concept is there, and you could see little slivers of it breaking through. Yeah, you had a final word on that?
I was going to say, if we'd have been playing Bournemouth at home, certain we'd have beaten them. And did you watch Man United on Friday night? If Man City had been playing at Old Trafford, they'd have done exactly the same thing to Manchester United.
But worse.
And they're 3 years in with a project and a manager, and they've spent an awful lot of money, and I don't see them laying a glove on this City side either. So we're not alone. As much as, like you say, it's a bit sobering, but that's just, it is what it is.
I totally agree. I think it's well said. I think if you want to focus on the positives, the pressing and the playing out weren't perfect, but you see in there the ingredients for a really good meal, so to speak, to carry that analogy through poorly. So we have to leave it there for this segment. When Clive comes on, we'll talk a little more about the portion of the game where we did play better, where the subs came on, and maybe look ahead to Chelsea a little more. So we'll do that with him. And for now, we're going to say goodbye to Paul. He's on Twitter at PosNoMyPants. Thanks, Pos.
Woohoo.
Tim is on Twitter at Stilberto. Tim, pleasure.
My pleasure as always.
Yeah, and my name's Elliot Smith. We'll come back with Clive. Remember, we do have the shirt giveaway going on, so go to the website, ArsenalVisionPodcast.com, look up shirt giveaway, and Obviously, it's totally free to enter. Don't have to sign up for anything. We're going to give away a free shirt. If you do love the pod, and we love you for listening either way, but if you want to support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/ArsenalVision podcast. We will have a new Patreon episode later this week. Of course, the regular post-match podcast will always be free and available. So one other thing about Patreon, obviously, if you sign up, we're putting ad-free versions of the episode up there as well, because that makes total sense. So thank you so much to those of you who listen, to those of you who support, and we really appreciate it. We'll take a break and come back with Clive.
'Cause I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith. Because I got to go for faith. I got to have faith.
Okay, we're back. We've got a lot more to talk about in this Manchester City game, but I want to let you know something we have coming up at the end of the episode, a little bonus. Oscar, you may know him on Twitter at Renewal. He has written an article for us. It will be going up live the day this podcast goes up, and it is going to be fantastic tactical breakdown of the Manchester City game. Our first article for the website, ArsenalVisionPodcast.com. So we are so thrilled that he has graciously offered to write for us. And there's a 5-minute interview with him just previewing his article at the very end of the podcast after I'm done speaking with Clive. So that's that. I will also let you know, for patrons on Patreon, the special episode this week will be our first In the Spotlight episode, and it will focus on Guendouzi's performance at Manchester City. The In the Spotlight episodes will be one player, largely one performance, a deep dive on what they contributed. So that'll be coming out later this week for patrons. But as always, this podcast, the post-match podcast, always free, always available. We love you for listening, regardless of how you choose to do it. So thank you so much. And Clive is here. You can find him on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
Hello, indeed. So where we left off with Tim and Paul was sort of the point of the match where things changed a little in our favor. I mean, to the extent that anything really changed in our favor. And that's when the subs were made. Torreira and Lacazette coming on, replacing Xhaka and Ramsey, and it made a big difference. So I wanted to get your opinion of those changes, what changed in the match, and the performance of the subs. That's pretty broad, but have at it.
I'll have a go, right? So let's go Lacazette first. You know I'm a fan.
You are.
I think he's... these are the games where you really see people like him. He's got a dominant personality, and I don't think he shies away from important games and big games. I think he sort of relishes them, and we see him now more injury-free, and I think he's got a lot to give in that position. And as we're bedding down a new sort of structure, a new sort of pattern of play, when you're doing that and everything's new, you always look for comfort as a player. Who's showing for me? And as soon as he came on, he started to show, and other people around him started to get offensive confidence. They started to make runs because they knew he would retain it. Defenders started to look better because they had someone to pass to. They felt more confident that they would push up, and we started to push them back. And I'm a big fan of partnerships and structure, and I honestly believe, I know we've had this debate earlier, and we both are massive Aubameyang fans, and maybe you more than anybody I've ever met in the history of mankind. But I think Aubameyang in the German league, YouTube highlights, rain down channels, scoring goals, versus Aubameyang in a Premier League, compressed space, higher intensity, 3 centre mids, 2 big centre halves, you don't get fouls. Aubameyang's going to go to the weakest point in defence, and that is between fullbacks and centre halves. And he does not like to be coming back to his goal where he can't see the tackle. Right? When he can see everything in front of him, he is the man. He can connect, he can cover distances, he can go from out to in, he can get anywhere you need him to be quick enough because his ability to move is fantastic. But he just needs to see where the tackles are coming from, where the action's going to be, so he can predict. If you ask him to turn around and show the defender his number, he's just not as good. Whereas Lacazette relishes that. He relishes the contact. He sets his leg wide. He sticks his big arse into him and he rolls around the corner. You know what they do? Defenders think, well, I can't move him. He's like a wardrobe. Even though he's small, I can't move him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step off. And suddenly we have some connection. And I think as this team is bedding down, we really need to make sure he's on the pitch, because everything around what we're trying to do is risky. But he de-risks us offensively. He allows other people to shine. Another thing about Lacazette, he seems to boost Aubameyang. Aubameyang he's a sensitive, emotional soul, right? Like most of our players. He's a happier person when Lacazette's around. So we don't just get one player, we get two. And we get a partnership and we get multiple passing options. So for me, that's all that happened. When he came on, our confidence levels rose. And let's be honest, he should have scored. The ball popped up for him on his right foot, and that was a looping volley over the keeper into the net. And he can do that, and he just got his connection wrong. Yeah. So I thought it was promising, mate. What do you think?
No, I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, look, I will take issue with this one thing about Aubameyang generally, is that, I mean, this is a guy who got 10 for us in 13 games last season. This is a guy who, you know, is one of the XG leaders in all of Europe, XG per chance leaders in all of Europe. He has proven beyond just, you know, sort of playing some of the farmers and the small clubs in the Bundesliga. I think the issue with Aubameyang that we saw against Manchester City was certainly just a lack of service, obviously. But there's more to it than that for me, and that is he likes to run onto a second ball. He likes to have those flicks around the corner. He likes to have another focal point that he can interact with. So some of this too, Clive, I think is what we have to realize is there is the Aubameyang who can play in short spaces with quick bursts from the edge of his area when we are dominant in possession. Obviously, we were not dominant in possession against City. So then you're seeing the Aubameyang who can run in behind. And it is very, very difficult to make that space to run in behind against City, but even more difficult when both center backs can focus on the runs you're making. And with Lacazette as another focal point, holding up the ball and getting it around the corner and things like that, it makes it harder for the center backs to just track Aubameyang's runs. So I think in a game like this, where we are in less possession, maybe that focal point is key to unleashing those runs for Aubameyang. And I might be tying myself into knots intellectually here, but I think it is going to be a very different situation when we're playing deeper defenses against the smaller clubs than, you know, the all-conquering Manchester City. Now, I do think Lacazette made a big, big difference in this game. I do think they showed all preseason that they have a partnership that is worth exploring in greater depth. And you certainly have me convinced that for the time being, we need to explore that further. Before we get too caught up in Lacazette, we should remember that last season before Aubameyang arrived, while he did fairly well at home, he really struggled away from the Emirates, as did, you know, all of our players, to be fair.
Yeah, and this is why I think they need each other. I actually think either of them on their own have a limit. I think they're very good, but I think together I see fewer limits. I think they will be so exciting and so energized and cause problems. They're happy out wide, the pair of them, and they're happy down the middle. They can score any type of goal you like. And I just think sometimes you see something and you might have a football philosophy, but you see these two together and you think, well, the first thing I would do is think, how can I get another one to go with them, a third one? But, you know, Emery's had one game, right? He's already halfway to being fired if you read around the right Twitter feeds, right?
Well, so forget those people. That's not really worth much of our time.
But just look at it numbers wise. There's 50 goals there if they stay fit. There's 50 goals. Mm-hmm. So why would you have 20, 25 goals sitting on the sideline?
No,
it doesn't make sense.
I agree with that, and you know we'll walk back to the decision Emery made at the beginning of the game, because Ramsey basically playing center forward as a pressing agent left us without a lot of out balls from the pressure when we did try to spring the trap. So the next thing that I want to get to, though, is Torreira. And where I thought this game really got away from us was in the midfield. Ozil was really deployed in midfield, and then Xhaka and Guendouzi were in midfield, and I thought Xhaka was fairly anonymous. I thought Ozil, struggled in the way that we wouldn't expect him to struggle in terms of his execution offensively, and we've covered that on the pod a little bit already. But for me, Guendouzi was doing his ample best to break the press and collect the ball and be clean with the ball, but he did make some mistakes. He did give it away at times and struggle with his positioning. When Torreira came in, you could just immediately see his confidence in terms of getting out of pressure, covering defensive runs, and tracking players. My question to you is, how much of the difference Torreira made is Torreira, his quality, and what we're going to see from him? And how much of it was maybe Manchester City calling off the dogs just a little bit on the press? Because to me, it did appear that City reduced the intensity of their pressure as the game wore on. Or do you think that we forced them to reduce it with the changes we made?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's interesting with Torreira and Lacazette. When Lacazette came on, he said, right, I'm the central man. Give me the ball. Right? Give it to me. Torreira comes on, walks the middle of the pitch. I'm the central man. Give it to me. So straight away, we added two spinal players. No debate about what they are. One's a 6, one's a 9. No debate. We can debate Guendouzi, we can debate El Neni, we can debate Ramsey, we can debate Mkhitaryan, we can debate Ozil, we can debate all the others. We can debate Maitland-Niles. They're multi-positional. We can debate Iwobi. Multi-positional midfield players, attacking or defensive or number 8, whatever you want. They can do a number of roles. This guy, bang, in the middle, number 6. You lot better start moving around me now because I'm in charge. Lacazette, the same type of body language, same type of football psychology. Bang, I'm the 9. Give it to me. You lot work off me. That's all that happened. We had two spinal players that came on who absolutely know what they are, and they started doing their jobs. And other people can see that, and they start to do the job that those two players are not doing, which is moving around and creating options. Right, so it is very simple, and I love that about Torreira. I love players who know what they are and absolutely walk on the pitch, and they just show it, and it just reaches out to the stands. It reaches out to the TV screen. You can see him. You know what his roles are. You know what his primary attributes are, and he goes out and does them. And you immediately start to look elsewhere, other players who are not doing what they should do. Right, so it's great two moves, and it just shows you that. Sometimes, Elliot, when you play the very, very best teams, you learn the most.
Yeah.
Because they push your players to the absolute limit, physically, emotionally, what happens under stress. Do they go and hide? I think a big issue in this game was our lack of bravery of some of our maybe 4 or 5 players at the higher end of the pitch that did not show the bravery that a 19-year-old kid showed. I think regardless of performance, I think attitude to play is really, really key. When people are negotiating big contracts, well, they're brave to do that. Are they brave to receive the ball? Are they brave to hold off Gundogan, for God's sake? I mean, come on. Let's be serious here. This wasn't, you've got to do your job. You've got to do your job. You've got to show your value. You've got to show your quality. You've got to have a desire to impose your game on your opponent. And I felt we were comfortable to be beaten in that first half. And many of these players are some of our favourite players that we hold on the pedestal. And I think as a manager now, it's going to be quite interesting because we all saw something. But what I don't know is how Emery's going to react and what he's going to do in the next game. Mm-hmm. There were things in this game which I didn't expect. So you may think, well, Clive, do you not watch pre-season? But I didn't notice the build-up play being so from the keeper. I just didn't know. I saw it. Maybe there wasn't the pressure in pre-season because people were falling back in and protecting their legs. But I just didn't see that as a major, major thing in our play. And suddenly it sort of manifests itself as the only way we're going to play versus City, which I thought was slightly strange. I saw some pressing, but we pressed last year. I saw some urgency. We had some urgent games last year. But what I did see was a pattern of play which had phase 1. And phase 2, we are relying on our fullbacks, Mkhitaryan, Ozil and Ramsey to be available. And so we couldn't get phase 2 in our build-up. Not very often for the quality of players that those guys are. They didn't show. So we had nervous defenders looking up with closed bodies, having to go back into danger areas, and City would just stay on the prowl waiting to take it because your body shape showed everything that you're going to do. It looked telegraphed. And that was because the pass around the corner wasn't there. Because those guys were in front of their man. Because they couldn't hold off Walker, they couldn't hold off Mendy, they couldn't hold off Laporte. They just tore through them. And they got discouraged and started to stand next to them and hide themselves. And I'm telling you, mate, you can't con me. I can spot a player marking themselves. I can spot your starting position. And I'm sure the coaches can. Yeah. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how Emery reacts to this.
Well, the interesting thing for me now as the takeaway from this, and I'm curious to get your sort of viewpoint on it, is where Xhaka goes from here. Because, I look at Torreira and the impact he made in just terms of making us feel that much more secure and safe. But also, look at Guendouzi. He played one more pass to Torreira in 20 minutes than he played to Xhaka in 70. And that's supposed to be his midfield partner, the two in front of the back four. And there was not a good combination there, a good partnership there, as much as I could see. Xhaka's flat-footedness, his slow-footedness, his vulnerability to pressure really was a problem on this day, and I think it gave Guendouzi and the defense one less option to get out from that press than they would have had otherwise had Torreira started. And so my question to you is, we're not going to play a Manchester City week in, week out, but at a minimum in big games, is this problem, a problem that we've seen from Xhaka before, the vulnerability to pressure and the slow-footedness, is this something that's going to see him struggle to get into the side, especially for big games?
You know what, mate? If you said that to me 2 weeks ago, I'll be arguing with you right now. But I'm looking at Xhaka's best position for Arsenal. I'm looking at Torreira's best position. And they both want to be at the base of the team. Now, the sort of player that Torreira is that he's quite ball dominant in his sort of attitudes and how he moves it. Early pictures, first time passes. He picks up the pace of the game. But his role is just set. I'm not sure how good Torreira will be in a 2. And if he's in a 2, I'm not so sure if Xhaka's that person. But what I will say before I rush to conclusion, Elliot style, is the guy...
Squeeze that one in subtly. Thanks.
You'd be disappointed in me, right?
Look, I got news for you. I'm not rushing to conclusions on Granit Xhaka, okay? This is not... I didn't come up with this last night, all right?
So just keep you on your toes, son. Keep you on your toes.
Fair
so
enough.
Basically, Xhaka, for me, he is one of those players that did come back late. He is one of those big body players that needs to be fit. And he was the one they played over El Neni and over others. And I think maybe it was just too soon. The intensity, you could see when he was unsure, he got his head down, stood on the ball, got robbed, looked very, very slow. He's slow, but he's not normally that slow, right? So I'm up for giving the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a very good player. But what I will say is, if I project forward where I'd like Arsenal to be, I would like our sort of, are we asking Xhaka now to be one of 2 8s, right? And if we are, is that really his role? Is he going to be one of 2 at the base of the team? We're not quite sure yet, right? So I think he's a very good player, but I'm now questioning where he fits in. But potentially he could rotate with Torreira, but I don't think people are going to be happy with that because we've all decided that Torreira is a new Vieira, so that's that. So let's see what happens.
Maybe Torreira standing on someone's shoulders is a new Vieira. Okay.
Well, you know what I mean? That central reference point, we're starting to see one there. And I think that's interesting. I think Guendouzi, he did a good sort of 19-year-old Ramsey impression when Ramsey used to just run around in that 8 position in a central role, just lots of energy, working really, really hard. I think he showed a lot of bravery and promise for sure. I think Xhaka, if we're going to develop this team, maybe not yet, but I'm a believer that athletically we need to speed up. We need to have much better sprinting in centre midfield, much better athleticism. Xhaka, when he's on top of his game, can do a lot, but there are some things his body just can't do. So he's maybe not for now, Elliot, but soon.
He picked up his yellow card in typical Xhaka fashion, using his arms where his legs would have done, so to speak. You know what I mean? Just getting his body in the wrong position, planting his feet, getting bypassed, and then having to reach out and haul down the man. And it is definitely something that when Xhaka is not switched on, when he's not fit and ready, that's a big feature of his game, is just getting his feet sort of stuck into the ground and not being able to move and follow players around. The thing I would say for Guendouzi is, you talk about players hiding. This 19-year-old, under the most intense pressure, and I don't just mean pressure psychologically, I mean physical pressure from the opposing players, he showed for the ball. He was available. He came back to it. He wriggled out of trouble on a few occasions. He made some mistakes on a few occasions, to be sure, but he was our leading passer in the game, and I think it says something that he didn't get his head down, especially after he makes a mistake that really could have been embarrassing when he lets that long ball go under his foot, and Aguero should have scored. He stayed right in it, and I actually think he finished the game. The last 20 minutes were probably his best phase of the game. So I think that at least speaks volumes for him from a character standpoint, which is good. But, one of the players that I think we're really going to have to figure out a role for him, and whether his role is as a starter, and maybe he's the one who gives way for Lacazette, is Mkhitaryan. Tim said earlier that he felt it was a poor performance for Mkhitaryan, and I have to echo that sentiment. I'm not sure he really knew what he was supposed to be doing. He didn't help back defensively, and I don't think it was clear to him what he was supposed to be doing in attack. Now, there were a couple of moments, where we did manage to press them, get the ball off. Then I think Ozil slid a ball to Mkhitaryan in the center of the box, and he just couldn't turn on it quick enough to get a shot off. But overall, is he the player right now for you who is struggling the most to find where he fits into our system? And I realize, again, small sample size, unusual game.
Unusual game, very good team, fully confident. With a good pattern, and we had two sort of wide men that are not really wide men, in my opinion, in Ozil and Mkhitaryan, and they're asked to sort of track two monster bodybuilding fullbacks. Right,
Walker and Mendy are terrifying. Just as an aside, Clive, I mean, the thing you realize, you always talk about pace and power and stuff, and I have to admit there are times I tune it out because, it's pace and power, cliche, but you look at Man City and you look at Liverpool and the two teams that really are probably the best in the league, and they are filled with hard-running players, not necessarily the biggest in every case, but players that can get at you with pace and get up and down the pitch a lot, and Mendy and Walker add an extra dimension in terms of pace and power on the wings.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I talk about pace and power, not so much. I know it sounds a little bit sort of cliche-ish, but I think it's where the game development's going to go, right? You can measure this. You can measure sports science. You can do things. You can measure people you're going to buy. You can see this. This is tangible. A lot of football is about opinion, but this is something you can measure, and it's there. It's facts. And right now, we all saw it, we were slower than them. It's as simple as that. We were slower, we were weaker, we weren't as fit, we weren't as strong. Did you notice how City tackled us earlier in the pass count? They didn't just tackle us, they went to hurt us. They topped us. They go in.
Gives me a chance, by the way, to reference, because it hasn't been brought up on the pod yet. I do think we got, and again, I'm not saying this was the reason for the outcome, but I do think we got the worst of the calls on the day in terms of the little chippy kicks and scrapes and cards. I think we could have asked for a little more from the referee.
Yeah, well, referees they're starstruck as well, right? They're watching this play and they're loving it. When there's a foul from a little Raheem Sterling, well, he gets away with it, right? Because they go very early and quick. So there isn't a chance for a referee to see a move developing that could be seen as taking an advantage away. And they do it very cleverly. Now, if I was Mourinho now, I would start to highlight this because I think referees are being conned by their early and quite clinical fouling in the pass count of any sort of breakaway move. And I think it's something to watch. But they do that to us. They did that to us. They discouraged some of our players from showing, right? And I think it's a major issue, right? So Mkhitaryan now is somebody that I think is somebody that needs to be more central. I think he needs to drive out of a central role. I think the closest player to him is maybe Iwobi. And I think Iwobi needs to be more central. But we've got Ramsey that wants to be more central. We've got Ozil that wants to be more central. And therein lies the problem at Arsenal. We have too many of these 10-stroke attacking eights. We're not quite sure what they are. When you looked at City's players, you knew what they were. Their wide people were wide people, right? Their central people were agile, intelligent, conduits to the wide people.
Let's be clear for a minute. When you say wide people, you mean they play out wide, not that they are physically wide people, like that they've been, hitting the fast food chains too much.
If you look at,
they're not like wide. Like you're not saying they're physically wide. They play out.
Okay,
wide. Yeah, just
you done me. I was about to say, what are you talking about? But yeah, you got me. You got me.
Okay, good.
So they're wide, right? So what's Pep done at Barcelona? He had four wingers straight away, rotated them, bang. He has Costa, Kingsley Coman, Robin and Ribery. First thing he did when he went to City, Sane comes in straight away. He's got Mahrez this year, right? So he doesn't mess about. He knows he's a positional manager. He knows what he wants. He wants strong fullbacks that connect with wide men, and he gets the ball into those areas, overloads, cutbacks, side foots, goal. It's very, very simple, but they make sure they have the right power and speed in these areas. We were bullied in wide areas today because we had number 10s playing wide that don't like running back. We had number 8 playing number 10 who tried his hardest, was just in the wrong role. You know, I'm not a Ramsey fan, but I'm not going to criticize him.
Well, and this was just a bizarre deployment. I mean, I get what Emery kind of wanted from that deployment, I think, but it was not a role that Ramsey seemed to be totally familiar with playing.
No, he's not. And Mkhitaryan, funny enough, when he was in central areas, he made a couple of tackles because he's got the sprinting speed. Ramsey's got the hard-working speed, but I don't see him as a pressing machine. I don't think he's quick enough. Right? He's just not his game. He's a smart, intelligent mover, but he's not a sprinter. He's metronomic, right? So we asked him to play on his physical edge for the whole game. He tried his absolute hardest and ended up with 7 passes. That can't be right. That can't be right. So that he was misdeployed. But then again, I asked myself the question, what's his role in the new system, right? So, and I think there are other players that can do that role just as easy, you know. And what we all know we need is more speed in wide areas to offer that counterbalance. And it's quite interesting when Aubameyang went left, Walker suddenly stopped coming forward, and we got some balance in the game because he couldn't overload with Sterling and Mahrez, and suddenly we had some sort of semblance of a foothold. And this is why I want to see something on the right-hand side with speed that holds people. That's where the game's going, in between fullbacks and centre-halves. You got to pin those people back, otherwise you get killed.
Yeah, I agree with that. So let's do this. Let's take a little more of a 30,000-foot view on this game and then look ahead to the Chelsea game a little bit. And, you know, I think for me, there were things to be encouraged about in this game, as weird as it sounds. I think some of our pressing was actually quite good, and we created opportunities that on another day maybe we'd put away. I thought some of our build-up from the back, when it worked, was really brilliant. You can see why he wants to play out that way, because if you can play out from the back like that, you create transition opportunities where you're not trying to break down 10 men behind the ball. The other thing I should point out is, you know, people are like, oh, kick it long. We invited too much pressure. Czech was 7 of 17 on long kicks. 7 of 17. So more than half the time you tried it, the ball's coming right back at you anyway. Now, I admit, coming back at you from the halfway line is better than coming back at you from the 18-yard box, but it's not like kicking it long is some panacea. You're giving away possession and losing a rare opportunity to attack them because they're not going to give you that much possession. So I thought the way we tried to play out is encouraging, but the problem is it's only so encouraging until you give up goal after goal after goal doing it. I think we are probably going to have to go with Leno if we want to play out from the back more regularly. So but before I get your sort of just overall thoughts on the contextualizing this game, is playing out for the back something that you are comfortable with and want to see us continuing to do?
Nah, I'm absolutely petrified, right? But I understand it from a football point.
But you believe in the philosophy or no?
Yeah, absolutely. From a football point of view, it looks good and it's great. But what you really want is variation, right? You want variation. You want smart decisions. So you don't want to just do something because you've been instructed to do it. You do something because it's been presented to you, right? So when those options are not there, you take another option and you keep people guessing. I felt we overplayed it slightly. And I think City were enjoying themselves and playing in areas that they want to play. And just looking at our pass combinations, all our pass combinations include our centre halves and our goalkeeper, right? So we want, if we're playing Ozil, Ramsey, and Mkhitaryan, we would hope that they would be in somewhere near the top of our pass combinations. If they are not, there's no point them being on the pitch because they're not great running back towards their own goal, right? So that's an issue. I think the major issue is that it's easy to point towards Peter Cech, who I thought showed bravery, and I thought he showed belief in what the manager was doing. I think that guy had a bit of a rough day, but saved us from a worse day. And as a professional, my respect for him is just huge. To embrace the change in philosophy at the age of 36, with the sort of attitude he shows, it's just a credit to him. Knowing the guy 10 years younger is probably going to take his spot at some point, but he's prepared to fight for it, right? So lots of people want to see Leno. We don't know if he can make a save yet, but we want to see him play because he can play football, right? So we have to wait and see. And what I would like to see from more of our players is belief in what the manager was showing, and he sort of touched on it, there wasn't enough belief. And what he really meant probably was we didn't have that collectiveness in our belief, which we needed more than just Cech's first pass. We needed the second pass, the third pass, the fourth pass. And that's where we fell down. So collectively, we need to believe in what he's doing. And I think, Elliot, we got an issue here now. I'm not sure where this is going to go. Is he going to push on with his strategy, regardless of whether he's got the right players, or is he going to produce a strategy which suits these players? And I'm not sure, because that was incredibly brave we did versus City. I don't know what you think, but that's what.
Here's a good point that I think you've just made, is that which is the right approach to football? Is it an approach that embraces your philosophical ideas, or is it an approach that maximizes the players that you have in your squad? I think we have to be careful here, because there's a lot of people saying, oh, it's a process and trust the process, so to speak. And, this is just the beginning and we're learning a whole new way of playing and it's going to take time. Now, there's a part of me that 1000% believes in that, and that following this process is our best chance to start to compete near the top again. But we have to be careful, because it's sort of a rigid adherence to philosophies by Arsene Wenger that had so many people kind of outraged and frustrated with him and ready for him to go. So I do take your point that while Emery has a philosophy that I admire and I think ultimately long-term can make us better, there is a question of whether or not you should dogmatically adhere to a philosophy if the squad that you currently possess does not allow you to effectively put that philosophy into practice. So I think we'll have to see how that plays out. I think it is worth pointing out, I think Petr Cech was probably a little bit hurt by the response he got from the fans at times. He had a little fun with them in response, but I can't imagine that he enjoyed the sort of ironic cheering. And if I were Petr Cech, I'd be a little annoyed as well, because I'm 36 years old. I'm saving your ass from losing 4, 5, 6-0 with some of my saves. And yeah, I'm not having the cleanest day playing out from the back to some very static players who aren't also necessarily where they should be. I don't think Cech's distribution was great, and I don't think it's a great part of his game, but I also don't know that he deserves a dog pile for it. And, Bayer Leverkusen posted what they thought, I guess, was a hilarious little video of Leno, playing out from pressure and sort of suggesting this is how it's done. And Cech just tweeted right at him and said, at Arsenal, we share important values, which make us a big club, not only on the football side. Fair competition, professionalism, and sportsmanship are the biggest ones you teach young footballers, and it's sad to see when other clubs don't share the same values. I thought that was fairly pointed, and then obviously the usual fucking morons on Twitter had to go at him, including Registability, the worst fucking account on all of Twitter, by the way.
I blocked it.
He is just an absolute fool. Had to go at him, and Cech said basically Google what professionalism means. But what I would say is that, if we want to play out from the back and we spent £20 million on a keeper who's better at doing that, then use that guy. Beating up Cech for having the same kind of struggles his teammates were having, by the way. I mean, Socrates put Guendouzi in it at one point when he kicked it right to him under intense pressure. Mustafi had a mare distributing a couple of times. Xhaka gave the ball away.
We were learning live and direct on TV.
Learning on the pitch against arguably the best team in Europe can be a rough lesson, and it was at times. So from a 30,000-foot view for you, Clive, I mean, do you see encouragement from the things he's trying to get this team to do, and do you feel okay about this, or do you think that we've been soft-pedaled how we should be responding to this result because of Manchester City's quality?
I think we have to almost throw this game away because of the quality we were playing against. I got to be honest with you, mate, and I think I know my onions about football. I did not expect us to be doing that. And I didn't hear us talking about it beforehand with any sort of emphasis. So I missed that. I did not expect us to be that consistently playing from a goalkeeper. I saw it in smashes, but I didn't expect that. I like it. It's the modern way. It's not the only way. And but I did see some energy. I did see some character developing. I saw some belief developing. And, the hindsight team that we would pick would be different, right? Knowing the performances and knowing who was fit and knowing who wasn't fit. And if we pick that hindsight team with maybe, I'll tell you who's looking a good player right now, who's improving by the minute, and that's Danny Welbeck, by the way, because he can play right side of a front three, and he can work really hard, and he can put the yards in, and he can threaten in behind. Reece Nelson's stock has gone up significantly, but not even getting on the pitch, because the fans recognise you have to have more than one danger point. I think as we develop that, I think we're going to see a really good side. I think what we've added is a bunch of water carriers and character and a little bit more resilience that maybe not ready for City yet, but what they will allow us to do is go to Brighton and not be a soft touch, go to Bournemouth and not be a soft touch. And I think those are the games we need to be targeting. Keep our home form to a similar level we had last year, but add 4 or 5 very good away games from opposition that we should be beating, because we've got the right resilience, we've got the right professionalism, we've got the right energy, and we've got a good pattern. And that pattern will look a lot better against not so good teams. So that's where my encouragement comes from.
Well said. Yeah, and I have a hard time disagreeing with any of it. I think it is fair to be annoyed losing 2-0 at home. We are a big enough club that even losing 2-0 at home to the all-conquering greatest of all-time Manchester City, I think you're allowed to be annoyed about that. I think especially in light of the fact that they really did have us at home on the opening day of the season is disappointing, and arguably with far less than their full-strength team. But if we're being realistic, we did finish 6th last season. We did lose at places like Brighton, as you mentioned. I think this is one of those results that you write off, you look for the positives, and you go to Chelsea, not just hoping for better, but I think in this case, we probably have to go to Chelsea expecting better. That is a team that finished 1 place ahead of us, a team that equally is learning a new way of playing under a new manager. And so, again, playing away at Stamford Bridge, never easy, but I don't think we get the training wheels for this one, Clive. I think this one we should go in and be able to compete, and you can't guarantee you win away or get a result away, but we should be right in this game. So what are your expectations from this one? And, I mean, first and foremost, how do you think he'll line up for it?
Oh, you must be joking. A lineup.
No idea.
No idea, right? Generally, no idea. I know I've got ideas myself, but generally, no idea. I think we're going to see this team develop. I think that game showed some clear issues. However, I will caveat by saying some of that is fitness. Some of that's mobility. Players like Ramsey are not the player they are when they're really fit. When he's fit, his movement is unbelievable. When he's not fit, he looks like a cart horse, right? Same for Xhaka. Didn't look good. Mkhitaryan, average. Ozil, average. Aubameyang felt alone until Lacazette came on. So I'm not going to kill them this first game, and I don't think it went well for a number of players. Chelsea, we can't get beat. Mate, we can't get beat. We can't be 0 points after 2 games. That's the most important thing. Stabilise, have something to show for a good pre-season, get on the map. If we were to win, we'd be 2 points up from last season already. And suddenly we got West Ham coming to our place with Mark Noble and Jack Wilson's in midfield. If we can't beat them, we need to sort ourselves out, right? So I think that's the most important thing. Don't get beat. Don't get too on the spin, because people are queuing up to kick Arsenal. It's quite interesting. A lot of people left the ground early yesterday, and the TV made sure they showed that. We're still in that spiral from Wenger. And I hope this manager, who I want to give a chance, just get some wins under his belt to just change the narrative, because the negativity around our club is just it's boring now, right? We need to move forward and think forward. So yeah, hopefully that changes.
I'll challenge that only in saying I don't see it being that negative right now. I mean, maybe I'm involved in more positive circles because I'm more renowned for my positive outlook than you are. That's a joke. But, I think that there is a lot of patience. I mean, I've seen how, just imagine if we had lost 2-0 and been pretty comprehensively beaten at home under Arsene Wenger. I don't care that it's City. I think there would have been boos and outrage and all the usual. I think people have taken this relatively well. They seem fairly sanguine about it, to be honest.
Can I add some specifics then, mate? In the UK, you remember that guy who used to manage England, Sam Allardyce? extremely critical on the radio this morning. Other media pundits were extremely critical about Emery having a full pre-season. They expected something different. They expected more. All the other teams had players at World Cup. Arsenal had a full pre-season. They looked tired. Hey, look, it's one game. I can't be crying myself to sleep over it. But that negativity, people may say to me, Clive, don't listen to Talk Sport, mate. That's what you get.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, they're right.
They're probably right.
They're totally right.
But it seeped into my head, right? So, and that's what I'm talking about, really. And I just, for the club and for the manager, and I would love to see that change and see some positive results come. And if you beat Chelsea, right, everything changes massively. Everyone says, well, wow, look what he's done with this group already. And we get a good run of games upcoming and we get well positioned. So I'm hopeful, mate. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I am too. I think Torreira has to play. I think the thing that scares me against Chelsea is that midfield, especially if Kovacic is ready and it's Jorginho, Kovacic, and Conte. That's a hell of a midfield. And they can run right down our throat. They can cover a lot of ground. They're technically sound. I think that could be the worry. You know, watching Xhaka's, head whip around like a swivel, watching people run past him is not something I'm dying to see. I think he's got big decisions about what to do in the middle of the park. And, I think the funny thing is the strategy he had for this game of trying to shut down the center of the pitch and leave space for them to play on the wings, we got destroyed because we were just too timid in the way we approached that. But that could work against Chelsea. Obviously, you need to keep Hazard quiet. That's going to be really tough. But I think it starts by not getting dominated in midfield. So we'll see, what he decides to do, and hopefully Torreira will be fit to start and ready to go, and that Emery's ready to trust him there, because I think he's a big part of making sure that doesn't happen. Agreed?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe for these games, I think it's obviously Ramsey's not in the best of shape. Ozil doesn't do well in these games away from home. So, I'm looking at people like Iwobi that done well there last year, like Welbeck. I'm looking at players like that. I'm looking at Torreira. I'm looking at Guendouzi. I'm looking at Mkhitaryan. I'm looking at him, who's also got the ability to transition. And I want to see those players get a chance. And then when we get back home, we can bring in Ramsey and Ozil back in. They'll have got their legs back. And, I think we'll see more. But we shouldn't be afraid to say to certain players, you're parked, mate, for this one. We want to go a different way. We want to up the work rate, up our transition speed, challenge people's century with people who can carry and dribble, and we want to run them back, because if we don't, they're going to pass around us all day long. So I think it's very important that we do that, and we accept that. And then when West Ham at home, let's play our patterns, right, and go and kill them. So it's a 2-game stretch. Let's see what we got.
Well said. Well, you want to take an early shot at a score prediction for it?
Well, I said 2-2 last week, which really means when I say it's a draw, that means we're going to lose.
Fantastic.
This time.
now we have the key for how to understand what you say. Yeah.
Well, not many people predict an Arsenal loss, right? So when you say a draw, what you really mean is, I hope we get a draw, but we're going to lose.
I got news for you. Stick around. I am not scared to predict losses.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever predicted an Arsenal loss, ever. Right? So I won't start now with Chelsea. We're going to beat them 1-0. That's
1-0.
how it's going to go.
So clean sheet. I love it. I love your optimism. Look,
1-0.
I think we're going to win too. The interesting thing is these are two half-baked sides, really. I mean, they are. There's a lot of quality in both teams. Ironically, I think our quality in the attack is probably more than theirs, which, is kind of a nice change for a change. Change for change? You get my point. But we'll see how it pans out. I am prepared to give Emery time. I feel for him because you've got players that are learning you. They're working so hard. They're training so hard. You want to reward them for that with results so that they see that your process works. And to have to start with City at home, Chelsea away, and potentially lose your first 2 games, and potentially lose your players right there to believe it's not working. All the training, all the extra work, his systems don't work, his methods don't work. Now, you'd hope they would have a longer-term view of that, but you really want these players to be rewarded for what they're working on so that they have faith in him and he has that faith in them, and that we all have faith in each other. And I guess, as a great man once said, you just got to have faith. So
there's got to be a song about
There's got to be a song about it somewhere. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay, so here's the deal. We are going to come back after a short break and say hello to Oscar, who has written the first dedicated piece, the first article for ArsenalVisionPodcast.com. It is a tactical breakdown of the City game. I hope you will give it a read. This is a little 5-minute teaser of it, a little interview with Oscar that we're going to do next. So thanks for listening. Coming up later this week on Patreon for patrons will be a special In the Spotlight episode focusing on Guendouzi and specifically his performance against City. So if you'd be so kind as to sign up, we'll love to deliver that to you. But again, if you can't, we love you. Thank you for listening. We are thrilled to have you, and we look forward to a great season together. So we'll take a break and come back with Oscar.
Yes, I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith. Because I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith.
So I am so thrilled for what we have coming up now because I get to introduce Oscar to you, and you should know Oscar from Twitter at Renewal, but there's a U in there, so it's Re-Unawal. Renewal is how he wants me to pronounce it. You're not going to find it if you look it up that way, but that's okay. We can get to the more mundane stuff at another time. The reason I'm excited to introduce him here is not only that he is a fantastic follow on Twitter and has great insight into how we play, but he has written the very first article for the Arsenal Vision podcast website. You will be seeing that going up the day that this podcast goes out. So I'm very excited for that. You'll be able to find it at ArsenalVisionPodcast.com in the library, which actually has a picture of Highbury. I thought that was clever. Maybe you don't. In any event, I've taken far too long waffling, and I should introduce him. Here is Oscar. Oscar, thanks for coming on.
Hello, it's great to be here.
It is great to have you here. And the first thing I want to do is just let you sort of set the table for people who will be reading your article about the approach you took. So this is obviously an article you've written about the Manchester City game. What are one or two key topics that you've tried to cover?
Okay, so when I'm doing articles for the site, I'll probably try and have a sort of tactical focus on the matches. So it's not necessarily going to be a complete overview of the game, but it's going to try and focus on one or two specific things. So for the first match, I'll just try to focus on our shape off the ball, the sort of 4-3-3 we saw, how high up Ramsey played compared to what we're used to seeing under Wenger. And then I've also tried to have a look at the pressing that we did under Emery and just sort of compare it to how we pressed under Wenger.
Very cool. And as sort of a sneak preview to whet people's appetite, were there a couple of key differences that you noticed? Because what surprised me, I was reading some articles that showed statistically we were pretty pressy under Wenger last season, which I wasn't expecting to find. And Manchester City is a difficult proposition for most teams, and it's kind of hard to get your press into them. But there were hopefully one or two things that stood out to you.
Yeah, well, that's one of the main things that I'm focusing on, is that I think there were a lot of misconceptions about our pressing under Wenger. You know, I think a lot of people view him as a sort of prehistoric manager who doesn't even know how to press, doesn't even think about trying to do it. But we actually did do quite a lot of pressing under him. And we actually had quite a lot of success offensively in terms of winning the ball high up and creating chances. So in the Premier League last season, Statsman have done some very good work on this for last season. And in the Premier League last season, only Liverpool and Manchester City created more chances from turnovers high up in the pitch. However, our big issue in pressing under Wenger was that when that top level of the press got bypassed, we were incredibly vulnerable to counterattacks. You know, Xhaka having to cover huge amounts of space on his own with the defenders. And
this needs to come with the trigger.
That's one of the reasons we conceded so many goals last season.
Yeah.
So I think with Emery, what the hope is that he can do the pressing while still allowing us to be compact, so that if they do get past the first line of press, it's not going to be an easy route through to the back four. Right. I think there was some minor positive sides, but obviously it's incredibly difficult to assess it when we're playing Manchester City, who are the best side we're going to have to face this season.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. I was just going to say it's going to be very difficult, I think, to make any sweeping conclusions from this game, but I'd be very curious to sort of read how you've broken down misconceptions about last season and what you saw early in this game. And certainly we love to be able to break down misconceptions, provided they're not misconceptions that I hold dear and that I have been espousing regularly. So that's sort of a caveat there. You did mention that you were also going to take a look at our playing out from the back. It's a topic that we covered a lot on this episode of the podcast, and I think an area of great interest based on how it went in the first game. Do you have maybe a slightly different take on how that went? Are we going to enjoy reading about our playing out from the back?
I'm only going to have a quick look at it. I think most people know what the issue is, and that's that our players just aren't particularly comfortable at doing the play out from the back, and that when you have Cech as a goalkeeper and Socrates as one of the centre backs, you're not going to be playing like Manchester City are. I was a little bit surprised at just how committed Emery and the team were to playing out the back, given that it's the first game under Emery and we're playing one of the best pressing teams in the world. I was a little bit surprised, but that's about it, really.
No problem. Well, I think that the thing we're really excited about having you on board and getting your article out there and hopefully getting more writing from you down the road is that I can say, as someone who has followed you for a long time, you definitely have a great eye for the game, a keen insight into the tactical side of the game. And with so much change coming this season, hopefully a lot of it positive, I think it'll be important to keep an eye on what has really changed from what we saw under Wenger in the past year and the previous years before that, and maybe try to get a clear picture of what Emery is trying to accomplish. We know it will take time for his new methods to bear fruit and really be absorbed by the players. But if we can get an early insight into what he's trying to achieve, maybe it helps us kind of understand the direction we're moving. So we'll look forward to reading your article with great anticipation and your further insights throughout the season. Again, Oscar is on Twitter at Renewal, but you're going to have to spell it with a U in there. So it's Renewal, which is fine. I don't need the backstory on that. I just need everybody to find your Twitter handle and follow you, because it is well worth it. So cannot wait to read the article myself. Cannot wait for everybody else to read it and definitely give their feedback. Oscar, thanks so much for coming on and whetting our appetites, and we'll look forward to reading you soon.
Thanks. Looking forward to writing across the whole season. Should be good fun.
Cheers. Okay, that'll do it for this episode. My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. We'll look forward to speaking to you after the Chelsea match, but if you are a patron, we'll look forward to speaking to you for the In the Spotlight episode on Matteo Guendouzi coming out later this week, Thursday, Friday. So until then, cheers, and we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Chelsea 0.